I'm Chantel Roberts, and I am a speaker, author, consultant, and an occasional expert witness for claims handling standards, practices, and procedures. My goal is to improve the claims handling experience through education, both for the public and for adjusters. Before we begin, I'd like to remind everyone to be sure to like, follow, subscribe to our podcast on your favorite distribution channel. This really helps the algorithms pick us up and suggest us to other listeners. So I've got my co-host this time. Well, I shouldn't say this time. I mean, because you've always been here. It's just you are a super busy woman. Because you're an attorney, and so you haven't always been able to be when we're doing the recordings. But yay, you're here. Yeah. Introduce yourself.
I am so excited. So I am Amy Johnson. I am an attorney, have been for about 25 years, and I am also a certified mediator. I am a consultant and an expert witness with respect to bad faith in claim handling, and across all product lines, so general liability, directors and officers, personal lines, auto. I have an extensive background in first-party property claims and third-party claims. Name the policy, I've probably read it and dealt with it. So I specialize in bad faith and claim handling as well, and am incredibly excited to finally be able to make the podcast.
I'm really excited about you being here too. And we talked, and you just mentioned, and it's a perfect segue because you just mentioned insurance policies. And so when we were talking about this, I thought, what we should do, because we came up with the name Insurance Suits, which is like brilliant, by the way, because it's like insurance, which is kind of like me, because I'm a claims adjuster aspect, and then suits because you're lawsuits and that's an attorney. And I mean, it's like, God, we are geniuses. And
Yes, we are.
yes, we are. So we came up with this idea of like insurance suits, kind of like a cheeky play on lawsuits and insurance. But I thought, you know what, before we get to lawsuits and what lawsuits are, because there may be some adjusters who are listening to this, there may be some lay people who listen to this. We might want to talk about, like, take a step back and go over policies. What do you think?
Well, I think that's a great idea because every dispute, every claim, every lawsuit that comes in is going to potentially trigger the insurance policy. And the policy, not the lawsuits, the policy dictates how we act internally as adjusters.
Welcome to the Insurance Suits Podcast, a bi-monthly discussion of the people who are involved in insurance and lawsuits.
I should mention, I spent almost 15 years in-house at a national insurance company as the director of property and casualty claims and assistant general counsel. So for almost 15 years, I oversaw the bad faith litigation and claims on a national level. So one of the things I've learned, the fundamental principle with respect to any claim is the policy, whether it's first party or third party. So I think we have to start there. It's the logical place before we can even look at what a suit does and how it triggers coverage. We have to know what coverage we have.
Right. I absolutely agree. And I tell my students, because I teach risk management and insurance, that insurance touches everything, absolutely everything. I mean, you cannot name one thing that, or I bet one lawsuit pretty much, except for maybe crime, that insurance isn't involved in,
Right.
So first party insurance claims, or insurance policies, I guess I should say. What are those?
So it's interesting. My background when I started practicing law was solely general liability policies. And
Love
so
me some
that's
general
where
liability.
I know, I love it. I didn't realize until I went in-house and started really getting into these first party property claims. It was overwhelming and a little bit intimidating. The language is very different. The intent behind them is very different than third party. And we'll go through some of the differences, of course, but I actually ended up really liking I'm an insurance geek, so I'm gonna
I do.
I'm
I
gonna get
am too.
excited.
Yeah.
I get excited about it. And so once I kind of mastered the first party property policies, I enjoyed them. And I didn't realize until I started working with first party property policies that bad faith and extra contractual claims and allegations increases exponentially on the first party property side over third party. And I think so. I think one of the biggest differences between first party, which in my view is the carrier making payment of policy benefits directly to the insured for a loss the insured sustained, where third party would be your carrier paying benefits to a third party who you owe damages or judgment to. So on the first party side, I primarily see it in the property context. Commercial businesses, they either insure their premises or they insure their product. You can have management companies procuring insurance for a condo association for their property, the building, in any connected buildings. So I've seen it in that context. There's also a first party component. It's called inland marine coverage, which
Yeah. I used to handle inland marine as well. Yeah.
Did you?
Yeah.
So tell me what kind of claims you saw on the first party inland marine stuff.
So I'm kind of like you in that I've handled almost everything. Okay, wait, let's just interrupt real quick. We are recording this via video, and we hope to have it on like YouTube for Aimco, who is our sponsor. But I just saw you take a sip. I've got here my teacup, and I just saw a coffee mug. So let me just interrupt real quick. Coffee or tea drinker in the morning? Let's just start that debate like right off, so everybody will, team coffee, team tea, whatever.
Okay, like a typical lawyer. I have
No. I think I'm going to ban the words. It depends from this podcast. Okay, go ahead.
No, it doesn't depend because I do the same thing every day.
Yeah.
1 cup of coffee in the morning and then tea all day. I love tea at night.
Yeah.
Love tea at night. Do not like decaf coffee. I will take caffeinated or decaf tea. Love it. I love it. What about you?
So yeah, I am more of a tea drinker. I, of course, am from the South, so I usually would drink iced tea, but I'm not a big coffee drinker. The only coffee that I do drink is like mocha, and it's only because there's like chocolate and sugar, and then more chocolate, and then more sugar, and then it's like, would you like a little coffee with my chocolate and sugar, basically? So for me to have, and then my next drink after that would be, Diet Coke. Okay, so anyway, inland marine, going back to the purpose of the podcast. So inland marine, the ones that I would do, because I'm kind of like you, if it's been an insurance, I've usually done it. I haven't done E&O, D&O. I have done a little malpractice, but it was veterinarian malpractice, no aviation. But inland marine, what we would normally see is dry cargo. And what I mean by dry cargo is not the marine, like the wet marine, ocean marine cargo that you would see. Usually you would see things like golf carts sometimes, floater policies, mobile homes. Invariably, well, of course, the
Okay.
mobile homes would be cargo because they would end up taking houses down the street and they would strike a bridge or whatever.
Right.
Yeah, so there's something like that. But talking about first and third party, what you were saying is I totally agree with you. I explained it to my risk management students as saying, okay, there's three people in a contract. Usually there's only two. In this particular instance, you've got the contract, which is the policy, and
Mhm.
it's legally binding. And then we've got the insured, who is the person who buys the policyholder, and the insurance company, the insurer. And that's the second party. So you've got the first party and the second party. And then in liability, where there is a duty owed where you're responsible for someone or something, that's when the third party comes in, and that is a claimant. And I do tend to, and I know that you and I and most of our listeners will know insurance ease, but I do tend to either say, first party claimant or third party claimant, because I do just like to point out that the insured, the policyholder, can be a claimant to his or her own policy, which is what a first party insurance policy is. They're claimants, first party. Okay, anyway. So, hi.
Right. Well, and I like to, I've gotten into the habit now of using the term policyholder.
Mm,
I used to do the insurer insured. Now, because it's actually hard to pick up, sometimes because they sound so similar. So I do a lot of carrier and policyholder. And so then to be able to throw the claimant in, typically will, for me, that's when I'm referring to the third party liability. And the thing is, those two types of policies, the same obligations, that the carrier has to pay, indemnity in both cases, defense usually only in the third party. But I have found, especially when I started handling the property claims, it's almost a heightened standard on the first party property, because the carrier is dealing directly with its policyholder. And while a carrier can be, and the policyholder are adverse to a claimant, they're on different sides of the V of the lawsuit, the carrier and or the policyholder can deal more adversarially, if that's a word,
yeah.
with the claimant. But in a first party, and this is why I think I saw so many more bad faith allegations, is because in that first party context, the carrier is dealing directly with the policyholder. And if the carrier is acting in a way that creates an adversarial relationship, you have to be really careful when you're dealing with a policyholder directly on a first party. It's you owe the same duties. It's the
Right.
duty of good faith and fair dealing, but you really almost have to go above and beyond, because you're
Yes.
dealing directly with them.
This episode of Insurance Suits is sponsored by the American Association of Insurance Management Consultants, or AMCO, a nonprofit association comprised of insurance and risk professionals. Find out more at www.amco.com. So let's talk about a couple of things that that I want to, just mention real quick. Okay, so we're talking about the duties of the carrier, and adjusters are drilled in, and I'm sure attorneys are too, that the duty to indemnify or the duty to defend is greater than the duty to indemnify. And basically that means, if there's a lawsuit, even if there's a scintilla of coverage, which is a lot what the plaintiff attorneys will plead to, you have to go ahead and provide that defense to a lawsuit. Now, when we're talking about like the duties of a carrier and the duties of an insured or policyholder, which we'll get into in just a second, I think, but I, I want to point out that yes, there is, I guess we can call this like, I don't know, lessons for adjusters, or I have no idea what we would call this, or maybe even lessons for attorneys or whatever, or lessons for lawyers. I don't know what we would call it, but I would like to point out that the thing that I'm seeing a lot of is the fact that there's maybe even in a sense of entitlement now from policyholders. And I'll give you an example, a little bitty war story. Sorry, just a little bitty war story. As you may know, and our listeners don't know yet, but my husband is also an adjuster. So our pillow talk is absolutely scintillating. I mean, it's just like great. We talk coverage.
Oh, to be a
all
fly
night
on the
long.
wall.
We
Oh,
talk
to be a
coverage
fly on the wall.
all night long. Anyway, so when he happens to have a claim in which the insured said, or the policyholder said, okay, I need a 4-bedroom home. And they couldn't necessarily find a 4-bedroom home for their loss or their additional living expense because their house burned down and they need to live somewhere else. And what the insured told the adjuster, who my husband oversees, is, well, I found a 4-bedroom home that will work in a different state. So I'm going to go ahead and rent that, for a year or whatever, knowing that you only need me to be there for 4 months, and then I'll let my property manager, is that okay? And I said, no, we are not giving the policyholder a vacation. No, that's not what we're doing. What do you think about that?
Well, yeah, but that's exactly what I'm talking about, where you have to really, you walk a fine line as an adjuster.
Mm.
And when I did training in-house, I did a lot more when I was in-house. I do some of it now. The thing that I always made sure I relayed to people was, listen, I don't care what people say about everyone treating each other equally and fair. As a carrier or adjuster, you kind of have to take some harsh comments, some constant phone calls, set up letters, threats, all of that. You cannot do like kind back. And nor should you want. I mean, yeah, there's some times where I'm sure an adjuster feels like saying, you know what, insurance, I'm not going to deal with this.
Right.
I don't need this in my day today. You don't really have the luxury of doing that.
No. And that's part of
at the same time, the insured is only entitled to get what is afforded under the policy. And in a first party property loss, the goal is to put the insured in the position that the insured was in at the time just prior to the loss. Right. So they don't get more, they don't get less, they get what they paid for in premiums. And sometimes that means they don't get everything they want.
Exactly. That's part of the fair,
that means you're
good faith and fair
fight.
dealing. Yeah, absolutely.
So, you still have to have, a modicum at minimum of courtesy, professionalism. The insured doesn't necessarily have to do the same back. But that doesn't mean you have to give them everything they want, because you're obligated to provide what's in the contract. And the funny thing is, here's another geek thing of mine, because I love insurance, but I get passionate. Contracts are the fundamental cornerstone of our economy, of our democracy, of our republic. And, you think about it, it's pretty cool to be able to look to this contract. Yes, it can be confusing sometimes. And yes, it can be, terms, you can disagree on terms. But really, it's the foundation of our economy and our way of life. Like, how cool is that? And you have to respect it. You
Absolutely.
have to respect the contract. It has insurance in general really is there for such a good reason, and it's sometimes that it's frustrating um, because it really serves such a purpose, and it's not an entitlement; it's a contract.
So
And
that
insurance paid.
that's a very good point. So like the policy is a contract, and we've been talking about, you know, the duty to indemnify, the duty to defend, duty of good faith and fair dealing. None of those things really, I guess, well, the duty to defend, I suppose, is in the contract, the insurance policy. Uh, and sometimes I will get the question of like, well, what's the insurer's duties? Because in the policy, there are duties for the policyholder, such as and their conditions too. Like if you don't pay the premium, we don't have to do anything. If you don't tell us about it in a timely fashion, that may, you know, be material, which is a big insurance slash legal term. um, you know, then we don't have to do anything about it. You've got to cooperate with us. You've got to file a police report, blah, blah, blah. Um, you know, so let's talk about some duties that both people, I suppose, have, or both parties, the policyholder and the contract or the carrier have.
Yeah. Well, those conditions are duties um, that are placed and obligations that are placed on the insured before they can get coverage. I call them what conditions precedent.
Mm,
Um, and that I like to use that term because it's a very good reminder that these conditions are things you have to do before we have to pay. So yeah, timely notification, that's just a reasonable thing to do if you're going to expect to get indemnified. Filing a police report, cooperating, letting us, if you're going to claim, you know, you've had sustained a financial loss on a first party claim, we should, and a carrier should be entitled to look at financial records.
mhm,
I
absolutely.
think of the insurer's duties though, because I think people kind of forget it's really three
Mm,
on a third party,
mhm.
It's really three duties. A duty to pay the defense, provide it and fund it, a duty to pay if there's a judgment or settlement for a cover claim, and the implied duty of good faith and fair dealing.
You know,
I mean, they're simple, it's simple concepts.
oh yeah, no, and I often write in my expert reports responding to this idea that, you know, the insurer has just like abused, or basically it's just a one-way street, so to speak. Like the insured,
Mhm.
the policyholder has to do all of this kind of stuff, but the insurer can just go around willy-nilly. And I'm like, no, you know, the contract, the policy may not have the all of the insurers, the carriers duties, other than if you do this, we'll do that. You know, like we will cover you, or we will pay in the event of a covered loss or whatever. But if you look at and of course, I guess this gets into this whole thing of four corners, eight corners, whatever, it doesn't matter. I'm not going to get into that. We can get into it later. But if you get into this idea that insurers, carriers are controlled or mandated to do certain duties by the departments of insurance, by
Right?
the legislature. I mean, that's what the whole unfair trade practice acts that are in what, every state that I've ever seen.
Yeah.
And it says you got to tell it for claims, you know, you got to tell your insured what coverages he or she has.
Well,
You-
yeah, I think, and it's funny that I'm so glad you brought that up because I am actually working on an expert claim right now dealing with California regulations. California is so regulated, even outside the insurance industry. But under the Fair Claims Settlement, I think,
Yeah.
Act, it's, you know, and I'm in Illinois. Illinois has very similar regulations, but I've been like delving into these. It's reasonable requirements to respond to the insured in a certain number of days. And if you're not, let them know you're not going to be responding. Timely and fairly, openly and honestly deal with your insured. That's basically what the regulations are out there for, to not just to guide, but to direct carriers to act fairly. You know, and then on the flip side, really, I mean, I put the fraud misrepresentation provision that is in every policy, where if an insured makes an intentional misrepresentation, you know, they can void coverage.
Right.
And you can fit that into almost a duty of being fair and honest with your insurance company. And so, you know, I've heard a lot of carriers over the years talk about how, you know, there's no reverse bad faith, where a carrier can't go after an insured for doing bad acts during the claim process.
I disagree.
Well, I disagree. Yeah. And
I think there's a bad faith setup. That would be a great podcast topic. Anyway, go ahead.
I love that.
Yeah.
I love that. But hey, that's actually in the policy. I mean, that's not implied duty. It's in the policy. A policyholder cannot misrepresent or conceal material facts during the claim, during the investigation that relates to the policy. I think that's fair.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
And what's reasonable? Isn't that kind of the standard? Every state has a different standard.
Yeah, every state does have a different standard. Hold on, I'm going to be slightly distracted for just a second, because my cat is here. So, I mean, like, now we can begin, you know, our podcast, because my cat's here.
Really delve.
Yeah. And so I don't know if he's on video yet. I'm trying to keep him out of video. Yeah, I'm trying to maintain a decorum here, of professionalism.
Oh, why bother?
I know, right?
We haven't seen the cat yet. Bring him on.
It's okay. We're post-pandemic, where everybody's showing their animals and all this kind of stuff. But yeah, I completely agree with you. And getting into, now that we've discussed some of the duties and everything, we talk about policies, and it's comprised of certain aspects. What conditions is one of them. I always tell my students to remember the acronym DICE, which is declarations, insuring agreement, conditions, endorsements, exclusions, and then the other D is definitions. Okay, so Amy, you know, we kind of talked about how we want to keep this you know, about like 30 minutes ish or whatever. So I say we go ahead and kind of like wrap up where we are now and continue our conversation on policies 101 in 2 weeks. How does that sound?
Love it. I am up for that.
Okay, great.
I mean, we could sit here for 2 hours, right?
Right. I mean, and I doubt anybody wants to listen to two insurance geeks. Like,
no, we'll break it up for you.
I know, right? So it'd be like, you know, you're exercising and you just listen to one thing and then you're like, okay, we're finished. So yeah, so this kind of wraps up another podcast, Insurance Suits. I'm Chantel Roberts, and I'd like to thank my co-host, Amy Johnson. We'll be back in 2 weeks, like I said, to discuss more insurance policies 101. You can contact me at roberts@cmrconsulting.net for consulting or training purposes on claims matters. And in the meantime, like we talked about, you can also contact if you need any kind of insurance consultants or expert witnesses on your bad faith case or consulting. You can go to AIMCO, which is www.aimco.com.
Awesome. And anyone is free to reach out to me. My email address is Amy, AMY.Johnson, JOHNSON at Hepler Room. Don't spell it helper. Hepler, HEPLERBROOM.com. My direct dial at the firm is 312-205-7726. You can reach out, a question, a thought, an issue. That's the only way, I'm convinced of this, that's the only way we all really learn how to do this, is by talking and having a discussion. You have a question, I'm happy to chat. I know Chantel is too.
Yep. We'll see you in 2 weeks.
Bye.
Bye.